Good evening and welcome to our Thursday night Sangha, to the Zoom world, and good to see people on screen. So tonight's teacher is Dr. Jonathan Page, who many of you know already, and tonight's topic is health or wholeness and Buddhist practice. And interestingly enough, in fact, I was quite delighted this morning when I went on to Insight Timer, and their little quote for the day was, "Health is a state of body, wellness is a state of being." So I thought this is very appropriate for what I'm going to be participating in tonight. And of course, in Buddhist practice and Buddhist tradition, that wholeness also includes interconnection, interdependence with other Homo sapiens and also other species, and belonging. Thich Nhat Hahn says, we actually experience interbeing with each other and the world. And I would sort of say for myself, if I pause and summon up some mindfulness, then I have a chance of having that experience of interbeing with others and the whole planet, the whole universe. So just a couple of biographical words about Jonathan. He has been a medical oncologist for more than 40 years and a Buddhist practitioner for nearly as long, although in his own words, he would say fairly erratic until 2004, when, as what often happens for many of us, life kind of pushes us to the wall and we are desperate for something to help us stay upright. And so I think about then was when Jonathan really got serious about Buddhist practice. Would that be fair to say, Jonathan?
Yeah, yes, that'd be fair. That's right.
So he continues to use both to use Buddhist teachings and practice both in his own personal life and also in his medical work with patients. So he's cut back a bit on patients, but still seeing people as a medical oncologist. And also, I think he says in his biography that he enjoys, and I have a little bit of a question about this word, enjoying endurance cycling over really long distances. Enjoy? Well, maybe. Anyway, he does do it and has done a 1,200 kilometer round trip from the Paris, Brest, Paris. And I think it's non-stop, but you must stop occasionally, but you don't get to have a proper night's sleep. Anyway, he's an endurance cyclist, a medical oncologist, and a Buddhist practitioner. And I must say, if I ever need an oncologist, I do hope it'll be Jonathan. So I'm handing over to you now. So let's just sit back and enjoy learning about wholeness, or relearning or reconnecting with our wholeness.
Well, thanks, Patricia. Shall we start with the meditation?
Sure. Right.
I mean, just to settle the mind, and let's see, probably about 25 minutes or so of just silent meditation. That'll be just to get us into the right mind space. So if everybody can just can settle in their own place, settle into the body, and we'll have a silent meditation. I guess while you're meditating, you may think about health and wholeness and just see what comes up in your own mind spontaneously. Because as Patricia mentioned, the sense of wholeness is often becomes clear during meditation, because it's, from my own experience, it's very hard to inquire deeply within ourselves in any other state. It's not something we can really address in conversation. So we have to use meditative introspection to inquire about, maybe in the context of a deep meditation, we may realize that we are complete in ourselves, and as Patricia mentioned, in our connection with the world. All right, everybody, let's just conclude the meditation. Just open your eyes and return to the room. And welcome to those who have joined us during the meditation. I noticed Enkong Tan has joined us. So I'll begin, I think I'll share the screen. So I'm going to talk about health and wholeness, and hopefully the Wi-Fi connection will continue. So this is, as we mentioned just before the meditation, an important topic. Health and wholeness are central to Buddhist practice. Health and wholeness are mentioned together because at one point they meant much the same. They were cognate, in other words. But of course, as time passes, the meaning of words changes. And so today, amongst the population at large, there may be no real understanding about what the words mean anyway. But to us, I think with reflection, we look into the words and try and identify the meaning that lies under the word itself. That's really the purpose. So I like the idea of wholeness. Even today, I think health, because when we have departments of health or personal health, we really need to reflect as to what that actually means. And in doing so, we identify all the various or myriad components of ourselves and everybody else. And not only that, we realize how much we have in common, that we're interconnected, that we interexist, not only with other members of our own species, but as Patricia said, with all living things and with the universe at large. So I've mentioned the first line, and with a regular Buddhist meditation practice, we can gain a new perspective on health, including the world out there as we see it. And of course, the world out there and the world in here are likely to be the same. And it's by considering the nature of health and wholeness that we understand these connections. And so the world out there, we're connected and we live within and we are part of, and it comprises other living inhabitants, some of whom are self-declared Homo sapiens. And then there are innumerable other species, other creatures, other phenomena that we're unaware of. There are species and types of living being that, of course, we are unaware of. We like to think that we understand all living things, but there are creatures that we have not yet seen, that have characteristics that we have no understanding and no imagination of. So, and as Thich Nhat Hahn said, and I think Patricia said this, we actually experience. So interbeing is more than a word, it's an experience. We actually experience the nature of being part of a living totality. So if we go back in time to the 11th century, we see the point where the word health became used in the population at large, and it actually did mean whole, and it meant uninjured, sound, entire, complete. It wasn't only related to illness. And then we see the Scottish word hale that is still used today, hale and hearty, that meant health, and also it began to mean happiness as well. And if someone was unwell or incomplete in some way, maybe they had experienced an injury, they sought to become whole again. And of course, the sense of being whole is a very personal thing. And one could have had a serious injury, perhaps an amputation, and yet recover and feel whole again. In fact, one may feel more whole than one did before, having been through the experience. And we have the word holy that comes from the same word, holy, hello. That has its own particular meaning of inviolable. So ultimately beyond violation in itself and free from imperfection. And then we have words like holiday, which was once upon a time a holy day. The word hail. And so you can see that it's an important word because it has all these meanings and all these variations. And nowadays we have wholehearted, wholemeal, wholesale, and so forth. Now, I wanted, as I mentioned before, in the preparation, this has been a work in progress, and the talk I give now has changed from the one I would have given yesterday. And that's the nature of wholeness. So I encountered the concept of luminous darkness, which is a book written by a wonderful woman, Deborah Eden Tull, and she gave a presentation at the Burray Centre, but has written a book. And darkness is a wonderful concept. And I was thinking during my meditation, does anybody remember the song of Simon and Garfunkel that begins, hello, darkness, my old friend? Do you remember that? It's a profound song. It's a lovely song.
I've come to talk with you again.
I've come to talk with you again. Yes, I've come to talk to you again. So in this book, Deborah refers to the Buddha just before his awakening. He did experience a sense of darkness. And he moved on from his rigorous and effortful ascetic path, which was even pervading his meditation in the hours before his enlightenment. And he received insight through a childhood memory. And you might remember that he was sitting under a tree, and many of us may have had that experience as a child. I think many children do have it. And he felt a sense of oneness with the tree itself and with the world around. And so he remembered that luminous, what he called a luminous darkness. And so the darkness has many meanings, one of which is that universal connection that we have with the universe. And it may be dark when we don't understand it, and we may not even be aware that it's there. But as a child, we may simply move into that and have a wonderful experience of warmth. As an adult, it's more difficult, unless we maintain our youthfulness, our childlike state, and in which we are prepared to dissolve into the universe or into the world or into humanity, and lose our sense of unbounded isolation. So darkness can refer to that sense. It can refer to emptiness. It can refer to ignorance, but it can refer to not ignorance as being uneducated, but ignorance because we admit that we just don't know as much as we thought or as much as we would like. So we suspend the desire to know things, because knowing things is often a pretense. And we may know things at one level, but if we close in on that knowing, we don't penetrate into the deeper aspects of the reality signified by a word. So I think darkness is a very central matter. And of course, darkness refers to mood, and that can be an emotional mood, it can be a spiritual mood, it can be a sense of bleakness, it can be depression, it can be a sense of isolation, and it can pervade our life. So it may be admixed with aspects of enlightenment. So it's a wonderful word. And I was blessed by, where are we? By encountering this book. Here we are. So she says, as I've mentioned, a spectrum of interplay of dark and light. So in our original nature, we celebrate the spectrum of luminosity. Let me just, here we go. The interplay of dark and night and day. And so there are these binaries, night and day, dark and light, being receptive and expressive, yin and yang, and of course the sense of a wholeness or emptiness, or in between, incompleteness. So if we have a sense of being incomplete in some way or less than whole, then that the difference may be, in a sense, darkness that we need to grasp. I'll just move on. If anyone has a particular question, they can always interrupt. I don't mind that. Now, in this book, there was reference to two very short poems by a wonderful American author, an Afro-American woman who unfortunately died a little while ago, Octavia Butler. But the first is, in order to rise from its own ashes, a phoenix must first burn. And I think that's lovely. There's a parallel quote I've got there: to survive, know the past, let it touch you, then let the past go. So there are two that are somewhat related from different books that she wrote. Others have quoted, or others have referred to the phoenix, Nietzsche being one, but a number of other people, in the sense that before we can flourish, before we can make spiritual progress, there may be a need to symbolically burn. Now, it's not essential, but, and of course, burn can mean different things, and it's not always dramatic. If anybody's had an experience or knows of that sort of experience, or feels that it is essential, that one can make progress in a systematic way, day by day, week by week. And I guess everybody's different. And of course, in a lifetime, we may not reach the ultimate goals of our spiritual practice. That is well known. But amongst this, there may be an opportunity. It may be self-induced, it may be induced by the universe, but a sense of burning or crisis. I think Patricia mentioned that I trace my own pathetic life, such as it is. It's actually not pathetic, quite the opposite. But I did have an experience during which I did feel pathetic, and it was a spiritual crisis that was probably a bit over 20 years ago. In retrospect, it was a blessing, but it was a burning, a self-immolation. It was a disintegration. It certainly perplexed the psychiatric establishment, who got it all wrong. But that's for another time. But it is for another time, but it's also for this time, because I've mentioned it, and it's hard to unmention things. But it does relate to the sense of wholeness. And what do we do if we become aware that there is something missing? That we've lived a life. Quite often well, most of us, I guess, by the time we have these thoughts, are in the second half, and you just wonder, what can I do in the rest of my life? And then you look around and find yourself embedded in your day-to-day complexity of work and responsibilities and families and so on. Yet deep inside you, you may have this little glow of attracting your attention. And that little light might be, that little candle light blowing in the wind, maybe saying, I would really like to have a far greater involvement in your life. I would like to illuminate far more. So I guess that's why many of us are here. But of course, we accept our predicament. But there's much that can be done, and I personally speaking, I find it a lot of fun, and I find it productive, and it's fun in the profound sense. Let me just move on. There was another poem that I saw which is quite dramatic, and of course Rainer Maria Rilke, I may even quote him a bit later on. And his powerful poem, You darkness that I come from, I love you more than all the fires that fence in the world, for the fire makes a circle of light for everyone, and then no one outside learns of you. But the darkness pulls in everything, shapes and fires, animals and myself, how easily it gathers them, powers and people, and it is possible. A great presence is moving near me. I have faith in nights. And this is the conclusion in the book on darkness, quoting Dogen, the 12th century founder of the Soto Zen movement, light and darkness are a pair, like the foot before and the foot behind. In walking, each thing has its own intrinsic value and is related to everything else in function and position. Now, I just mention other aspects of this area of consideration, which may seem a little distance away from health and wholeness, but I don't think so myself. So, for example, we have the concept of the Numinous. This is just to indicate that this has been a preoccupation of wise men and women in all cultures, really, in modern time. So this was a particular word derived from the Latin numen, meaning arousing. I think it means arousing spiritual or religious emotion, the mysterious or awe-inspiring, by the theologian and philosopher Rudolf Otto. In his book, German book, The Idea of the Holy. And of course, Jung used it a great deal. His central thesis was often the whole and how we encounter that, often through the dream world. We get information about our status. It can guide us as to what to do next. He talked about the mysterium tremendum. Others, such as Mircea Eliade, spoke about a sense of wholeness as well, and used the word numinous. So Carl Gustav Jung, in describing an addict's craving or grasping as the spiritual thirst of our being for wholeness, and he identified that as many do, as a motivation for our life and for the actions in our life. That underneath there is a quest for experiencing a sense of wholeness because it is so profound. And as Jung said, the right way to wholeness is made of fateful detours and often wrong turnings. And this often does result in a burning, a symbolic burning, if you like, a catastrophe from which we learn a great deal. Or not, we may not learn. It may be someone else who can explain that there are benefits in our catastrophe, but it's possible that the meaning of a crisis may go unacknowledged. And his last revelatory dream, before his death, he saw a stone engraved with the words, and this shall be a sign unto you of wholeness and oneness. So I think that's it's an opportune revelation, isn't it? Just before you die, that you have entered a state of wholeness. And then there have been other, well, that's me. I'll just mention in passing the wonderful Greek philosopher Plotinus, who used the term henosis, which meant oneness, union, unity, unification. And so the Greeks were very concerned with this sense of wholeness. And of course, this was a lot of this thought was at the same time as the Buddha was flourishing. And that's sort of related to this notion of the axial age, that in different cultures, in different parts of the world at the same time, there was a similar focus on similar matters. And so I won't go through the details of what Plotinus proposed, but there were various phases in a life of purification, of identifying the need to purify oneself, to identify those aspects of ourself that, if you like, are unnecessary, that are contamination, that we can do without to allow other aspects to flourish. And that can be in the pattern of our thoughts, in our behavior, in our attitudes and beliefs and so forth. Each person would be different. And then that leads to another stage later in life, autophany, which is a luminous vision of one's own self. And then finally, we have the experience of union with the One. So this would be, in the Buddhist sense, approaching some of those latter stages, approaching enlightenment. And that experience of enlightenment, in lesser stages, may be transient. We may get a glimpse, as the Buddha did when he was young. And I think it's possible that these epiphanies arise more frequently than we think. And often they do enter the Western literature. And I can think of several, for example, famous novels, including experiences of this sort of revelation, particularly in the Long Day's Journey into Night, Eugene O'Neill. I don't know if you've read that book, but that was one of the key experiences in that book. Was a young sailor on a sailing boat sailing south through the Atlantic towards Buenos Aires, and he had several hours off his work. He was given a break, and he was lying on the bow in the sunshine, and he describes in the book a sense of disillusion. He said he became the spinnakers in the breeze. He became the seagulls in the ocean, and it was just overwhelming. And as it turned out, Eugene O'Neill himself, the author, had a similar experience, which he couldn't explain, which overwhelmed him, and which consumed him. And he became distressed and couldn't explain it. And so he was using his literature to try and determine the nature, the cause, the explanation of that experience of sense of oneness, which happened to this sailor. Okay, and then there've been some other books, just to mention some. The Wholeness of Nature by, well, it's about the life of Goethe. So Goethe, apart from being a great novelist back in the 18th century, was a scientist. And his mode of science was to immerse himself in the natural world and to become part of it. And he describes his techniques, and they continue to this day. But he felt he was experiencing the wholeness, the totality of nature, and he had to be part of that. And then there's the Hidden Wholeness is another popular book. Oh, there we are, Parker Palmer. And then we have the Healer's Art Course. Now, this takes us back towards the healing profession, so-called. But unfortunately, the medical profession doesn't always heal. Often it does the opposite. People can be discharged, no longer bleeding, but feeling devoid of any substantial relationship with anybody in the experience. So Rachel Naomi Raymond is a wonderful woman in the, I believe she still works in San Diego, in the University of California University in San Diego. And she says there's a great deal more to personal wholeness than physical health, and more than that medicine can offer beyond curing of a disease. Over time, I've come to think of physical health not as a goal, but as a means to enabling people to pursue what has meaning and value in life. So that was her experience. And she had a chronic life-threatening illness when she was a medical student in her 20s. She had an inflammatory bowel disease, and only returned to good health when her entire large bowel was removed. And of course, that had a major impression upon her. And she looked around as a young doctor and could see that all the issues that she had not been addressed. I mean, she felt that at the time, that all her suffering was unknown to the doctors and nurses who were attending to her. And I'm sure you've had the same experience. I have had that experience several times, right, where my distress has not been addressed, It's not been acknowledged. And the people around me in the hospital had no idea. Have you had that experience where inside you, you feel desperate in some way? If you haven't had that experience yet, it may happen. But people that should know, and I guess as a doctor, and those of us who are doctors or no doctors, I mean, it is not so difficult for the doctor to ask the simple question, how are you feeling? And then, of course, be prepared for any answer. Whether it's, I feel like I just want a suicide, doctor, I can't bear to live. I mean, that's the risk you take if you ask someone that question in hospital or in an office or wherever. You have to have an answer for that. And of course, it may be that the state of mind of a person at a particular time is far more seriously disturbed than their physical health. Even though they may have a high fever, or they may be bleeding, or they may have chest pain, that is only the tip of the iceberg. Now, I just propose, of course, in this, there is the assumption that we have a sense of ourself, and that may be a deep sense. We may be focusing on ourselves much of the time. There may be certain events that happen in our life that encourage us to think about ourselves. And there are all sorts of questions that come up from time to time, or could come up. Where did I come from? Some of these questions from childhood, are genuine questions that could well be asked at any age. I was not taught about wholeness when young. Well, that's right. How have I spent my life? What are my formal and my spiritual CVs? Has there been any wholeness in my training for what I do? Do I need wholeness to be a participant in a family? The highs and lows of my life. This is on reflection, of course, as we think back upon our life, if we do so. Buddhism in my life, how has it affected? Has it permeated my life, and to what extent, and to what degree of benefit? Where am I now? Why am I doing this? What are my specific qualifications? And so forth. I think these are wonderful questions. Because it's only through those questions that we reach the point of, am I complete? Am I whole? Have I made progress? Has the progress I have made been delusional? Because we can acquire a lot of certificates of accomplishment, distinctions and degrees and so forth. But when we think back at a later time in life, sometimes we can be disappointed, or not as thrilled, or not as pleased as we might, and that can be a surprise. And then the open mind. What is this concept of mind that we have? I mean, where is this mind? And do other people have the same experience? Mind and consciousness. And when and where and how did we acquire this? Did we acquire it, or did we enter it? In other words, is the mind and consciousness beyond us? Are we part of a universal mind and consciousness? And how do we know that? How can we determine that that is the case? And does it matter? And then, of course, the possibility of open and closed minds. And there must be a spectrum. And what's the mechanism there? How do I know? How can I prevent my mind being closed? And does it matter if it's closed from time to time, perhaps to rest? And if it is closed, or if it's narrow, does that mean I just don't see the nature of reality as clearly? Have I ever encountered reality? And through which modality are we noticing our own minds? So is the mind looking at itself? And sometimes we find ourselves in this predicament. Where we're in of course, the description of being in a self-constructed cell. And Rumi, the poet, would say, wake up. You may think you're in a jail cell, but don't you notice the door is open? you can just walk out at any time. But of course, even then, we may choose not to walk out because we don't know what we confront. It's a little bit like the our Plato's cave. You know, we live our lives very deep in the darkness of a cave, and yet there's no barrier to us getting up, walking around a few curves, and there's the entrance to the cave in sunlight. Well, this is pretty much what I just said, isn't it? Rumi, why do you stay in prison when the door is so wide open? Move outside the tangle of fear thinking. The entrance door to the sanctuary is inside you. And then there are the matters, if we're thinking about wholeness, what are these various personal dimensions? Of course, there are the physical dimensions of our body, the way we perceive our body, at least. But does the body have a fixed size? I mean, is it fixed as much as we think it is? And then, of course, there's the nature of our own awareness, which I've been referring to, and where does this quality reside? And how can I know when it is not well developed? Because the awareness itself is what tells me. And of course, this awareness may be the explanation of our perception of different domains of ourselves, the physical, the psychological, perhaps the social, and the spiritual. And what are the distinctions? So these are all important matters that come up, because if we're talking about wholeness, then we have a perception or awareness of our own sense of wholeness. And so we are the knower of this information. And so there are various categories. We don't have to be obsessed, but just be aware that there are categories. Categories are denoted by words, and these words may have different meanings. And sometimes we have to delve deeper than the word itself. And I'll mention this perhaps a little in the next few minutes about the concept of the spiritual domain, which is in the bottom line there. And then others have tried to, there are so many diagrammatic representations. So this is one from not so long ago where we have these different components, dimensions of existence. It's a very proud title. But this is not the result of any particular experiment. So we've got the physical, social, personal, and spiritual. Now, I won't say too much about it. I think we can all criticize the huge physical dimensions and the relatively small spiritual up at the apex here, and the fact that they're in separate strata rather than being mixed in together. But I think the fact it's there, we can criticize and know that the truth is otherwise. And likewise here, this is a psychologist, I think, Roberto Saglioli, and his famous egg diagram used to illustrate the different natures of the human mind and the various parts to your consciousness and how they relate. So we've got the lower unconscious, the middle, the higher, or the super consciousness, the field of consciousness. So we've got four. That's the field of consciousness. We've got the collective unconsciousness out here, which is where all our consciousnesses blend together. And then the higher is there, and the higher self. So where's the higher self? Well, it's up there at the very top. So I have my doubts whether this is either the truth or anything like it, or valuable. And it's an egg, and what I would like to do, as we all are tempted with an egg, is to crack it open and see what's inside. Because I think inside is where the important nature is. There will be some essence inside this three-dimensional egg. It shouldn't be 2 dimensions. It should be at least 3. And then speaking of 3 dimensions, of course, this is another way to see ourselves. And I'll now move on to the spiritual dimension. How do we or can we assess our spiritual domain? And is it really ours? What is it? Where exactly is it? Can these questions even be asked, let alone answered? And how can I gain more experience of the spiritual zone? Can it be understood? What about consciousness? So, of course, the mind and consciousness and all these questions in different ways were being addressed by the Buddha and would be addressed by individuals that are following the Buddhist pathway, which is basically us. And these questions, because I put them on a slide, they've obviously occurred to me. And of course, not all questions have answers, and answers may be individual. They may present in different forms from the question, and the answer may be unsatisfactory. In other words, we may ask a question, we may get a truthful answer. Like the question may be, am I highly intelligent? And the answer may be, unfortunately, no, you're not. And so we regret asking that question. But then we may dispute the qualifications of the person that answered us. And I think you probably know the poem that's going to follow, and that's Love the Questions, and a second poem by Rainer Maria Rilke. And it's be patient to all that is unresolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves as if they were locked rooms or books written in a very foreign language. Do not seek the answers now, which cannot be given to you, because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now, and perhaps then in some distant day, you will gradually, without even noticing it, live your way into the answers. And I read that poem so many years ago, and I think it has been so useful. It has been so useful that when you stop trying to ask questions and certainly answer them, you stumble into all sorts of answers. And those answers are within the body. I mean, they're within the felt sense of your body. It's not just a bunch of words. The answer to a question, an important question, is an experience. And experiences arise when the experience chooses to arise. So I'll just I'll pause. What's the time? I've got another few minutes, and then I'll allow some time for questions.
We've got about 20 minutes, Jonathan, till 9 o'clock. So yeah, if you want to.
I might make this the final slide then.
Well, I'm not sure what the questions will be. So if you want to
all right,
break it up, then that we'll see how we go, shall we?
Yeah, I'll just cover the next couple of slides, and then we'll see what questions arise. So being less than whole, fragmented and empty, as I've mentioned, these phrases may come up or they may not. They may not be correct. And I think we address them as we do other confrontations in a wise way. What does this mean? Is this relevant, or is this some transient whim that I can just let fly away? So is it so? Am I less than whole? What do I compromise? Am I alone in this diminished state? Do other people feel it? Are we all diminished in some way? I'm suggesting that this is not the case. What are my boundaries? Interconnectivity, just a degree of incompleteness, perhaps lacunae, so just maybe a few little bubbles of within ourselves of non-material matter, or within our minds. There are just maybe a few important things we don't know. And then there are very important existential issues that are not addressed in our culture about the nature of our existence, which we ask in words, but we tend to be aware that the words are not really addressing what we feel in our mind. Just we're aware as we get older that we're only here for a finite time. Why have we been a life form on this planet with other people at this time? Have I made the best use of my time? Or has the universe enabled me to have the experiences, and so forth? All these sorts of questions arise. Maybe it's easier to live a life without asking the questions, but I think they're very useful, and I think meditation and diminished cognition is the way to go. And so often these, and on retreats, of course, if we can have a period of quietude, introspection, meditation, then big questions are answered. And then we start to actually feel that we're part of the universe, part of the natural world and the universe beyond it. And I'll just raise two concepts before I finish. And of course, these were very important to the Buddha, samvega and pasada. Are you familiar with those? If not, I'll mention, so samvega is a very important concept, and it's just what I've been talking about anyway. It is a spiritual urgency. So it's that emotion. What was this all about? And so that's similar, very similar, and overlapping the sense that we have addressing our own lives. Whereas, of course, we're aging. We've all experienced illness. We've experienced or encountered friends and family who have died. And we know people that are searching for the answers to their fundamental spiritual questions, including ourselves. So we have that sense. So that drove him to his quest for the truth. And so that's samvega. And I'll just bring up that slide again, if I can. I can't get it up. I'll leave that. But the problem with samvega for lesser mortals is that it's overwhelming. I mean, how do we find out the answers to these fundamental issues about life, getting older, and all the problems that are associated with that? The dissolution of friendships, and people we love are dying, and it's how do we manage that? Where are the wise people? Where are the extant Buddhas that we can go to and get some solace, some explanation about all of this? And so that it can be overwhelming. And I think many of us get a sense that it is, and therefore don't penetrate the question any further. But I mentioned pasada, which is an associated spiritual emotion, and that, if we're lucky, coexists, and that provides us with clarity, with peacefulness and clarity and reassurance. And so the two balance each other. And it's wonderful that they both coexist, or can coexist, should coexist. And so I think, at least if we see someone who is in the grips of samvega and really need to know, we can at least provide pasada. And one would hope that the medical profession would be on top of all of this, because there are people with various forms of samvega entering the portals of hospitals all the time, often with other illnesses, physical and psychiatric, and pasada is not really part of the solution. But it was 2,500 years ago, and still is. And it's very reassuring that we can be stimulated to address these issues, and that we have an emotional capacity to do so. It's generally done in concert with other seekers, other people, such as we have here today. And in my experience, we start to get answers, like early answers, glimmers of explanation that are so reassuring. So I will leave that at that point, because I think that that's the approach to wholeness, that it's there, we can approach it, and I think it's reassuring that it's a perception, it's a reality, and there's a way to address it with confidence and with the expectation that we can get some great reassurance. And as we really approach non-duality, I think sometimes we get the sense that we're returning home. So I will leave it there, and I'll ask for any questions, reflections, comments, whatever you have to offer.
Well, Jonathan, I'd just like to say that I have a kind of switched on sense of Samvega after your talk. I had been thinking about it before tonight anyway, but I think that idea of curiosity and urgency is, and also maybe something that comes more with age, because we do have an awareness that there is less time ahead than behind. And I guess I also, I think that so much of what you were speaking of tonight is beyond words, but we have to use words to kind of begin to investigate it, and particularly if we're trying to do it with other people. But I think you did also point out, and I feel that it's a really kind of useful thing to remember, that a lot of it is experiential. And so to have some time and space and pause to kind of just simply feel that stuff, as I think Thich Nhat Hahn talks about so well, so simply, but with a depth. So thank you for sharing so much with us tonight.
And I think that idea of words, that it is the experience, but I think I think we are the way we are. In other words, I mean, two people, say, together, can put their phones aside for a start. And then, I mean, if one looks into the face of the other, there's a natural response to that, particularly if one person says to the other, can I tell you about the way I feel right now? Or can I tell you about what's on my mind? You know, and or they might just say to them, I haven't thanked you for being my friend for a long time. Can I thank you now? You know, and or it could be deeper, you know, to a married couple, or a couple that are within a family, just telling someone how much you love them, how important they are. You know, and as soon as you say that, I mean, if you're looking at someone in the eyes, you're both focused on the other, you've created an environment which is not to be interrupted. It's quiet. You don't have to rush off anywhere. You know, you just create that. And then you can talk very deeply to the other person. And then a lot of these issues just open up and resolve. Because I mean, sometimes we have doubts about feeling foolish, or perhaps breaking the perfection of the relationship by using words. Oh, what will he think, or what will she think? You know, but I think it's so important. You know, we don't live so long that we just cannot avoid doing that. And we know that if someone said that to us, how overwhelming it would be. And so why shouldn't we be the first? Why can't that be regarded as a wonderful gift to someone? And you can just be creative in the way that you say it. Whether you simply say that you love them so much, or that you're blessed that they have been part of your life, and whatever. I guess sometimes you may be having difficulty. You could write something down beforehand and then say, I just had to write this down in case I forgot. I wanted to get it just right, so that when I read it to you, you would be pleased, or whatever. You know, and then suddenly you realize in doing this that nothing is more important in the world. That you just feel so complete with the other person, whether it's an adult, a child, a parent, And I guess you can have a relationship with people you know less well, but perhaps you're not in conversation. You're just identifying somebody in the public space and in your own mind saying, hello, fellow human being. I wonder what's happening in your world. I know that you too are vulnerable to danger and disappointment, to the loss of love. And I wish you well. And I think so the Brahma Viharas are wonderful in providing that opportunity to enlarge ourselves. Yeah. Enkong.
Thank you. Hi, Jonathan. Just to follow what Patricia touched upon, thank you, Jonathan, for being a friend to all of us this evening. And thank you for sharing the breadth and depth of your feelings and thinking about these imponderables, really, by using the word wholeness. You covered philosophy, psychology, spirituality, and so on. I'd just like to share how I felt at different times of your talks. There was a movement, I thought, from IQ to EQ, and then finally to SQ. There was a lovely progression as you related to us, as you shared very deeply. Yeah? Of course, the questions you raise, which to different extents, all of us have asked ourselves the same questions. I don't know anymore whether my answers are from me, myself uniquely, or whether my answers are because of what I've been exposed to in life, and in particular, what I have gathered and I've gained, I feel, from Buddhist practices and teachings. So with a lot of the questions you were asking, I could, in a sense, give the Buddhist answer, right? But if I got any deeper, like I think you were wanting to share very deeply, perhaps from the essence of yourself, what is your answer? We actually come to realize is ineffable, because we have to ride upon what others have said or what others have realized through the same questions for themselves and shared it with the world, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And so there is, and now my Buddhist influence comes in, was reverberating with you in your talk, that there is basically, and we can't avoid it, a basic unsatisfactoriness, and in terms of your talk today, maybe a basic unwholesomeness or unwholeness, that we can't be whole all the time, because we are in unsatisfactoriness, we are in dukkha, and we can't come out of it entirely. But of course, in our deep meditations and in our hopefully growing spiritual development, as you said, Jonathan, we might get glimpses of feeling that wholeness, the glimpses of being enlightened, or thinking for a few seconds, for a few minutes, we are there, and we smile. But inevitably, we get back to all the questions you asked, and inevitably we realize we still don't know. And we also have to have the humility to say, I don't have the answers. I don't have the answers to all these deep and searching and relevant questions. I can only answer to the extent that I've had experience in life and the inputs I've had from my spiritual leanings, isn't it? But really, nobody has those full answers, but the Buddhas or the enlightened ones do their best to share what they have discovered with us. And even then, they do tell us that some of our questions they can't answer. And it's as Patricia was alluding to, it's more at the experiential level. So it's ineffable, and it's difficult to. But you've done a great job in putting words to what is really ineffable. So thank you, Jonathan. I really enjoyed your sharing. Thank you.
Yes, I think I've come to use the phrase I am of the nature to ask questions that can't be answered, and that sort of just diffuses it. And also I'm of the nature to not give myself credit enough for being an active participant in the universe. I mean, I'm doing the best I can, and any credit that I feel I deserve is to be shared with all other humans. You know, I'm not. Everybody has contributed because of the interconnection, and that sort of can generate quite a bit of deep satisfaction.
Yes.
And you think, well, I've entered quite a wonderful place.
Yes.
You know, because I'm not unnecessarily criticizing myself or others.
No.
And maybe glimmerings are all we will ever have. Little glimmerings of that satisfaction, or of that joy, or of that deep confusion, or just being kind of all held together just in this moment, but then gone.
Well, yeah, I think it's gone.
Oh no, I've jinxed him. He's gone. Oh no. Actually, we just lost you, Jonathan, and it is just coming up to 9 o'clock. Have we got you back there?
Yes, I'm back.
Okay.
Oh, yes, I'm back. You've got me physically, psychologically, and spiritually all in one.
Excellent. Fantastic. What a package.
Yeah.
But I think it's probably is time for us to end, unfortunately, because I think, you know, this whole talk tonight could really occupy a whole day, or at least half a day of you know, with opportunity for some conversations and some discussions. So maybe something we could think about for another occasion. I'll hand it back to Meredith, who's just beautifully popped up on the screen at this moment. And thank you everyone for your attendance and contribution by deep listening tonight. And thank you, Jonathan, for your wonderful insights and glimmerings.
And thank you, Patricia, for hosting this talk tonight for us. And Jonathan will be back on the 12th of October and in October. So we'll be continuing this very deep topic here. So we hope to see you again back in October with Jonathan. So for next week, we will have a workshop or a dialogue session, rather, by David O'Rose and Tina on a very popular topic about transforming conflict. So we may see some of you next week, but I won't be here. I'll be back to Malaysia, see my mom. So Bronwyn will be hosting the talk. And also, if anyone, if you know anyone who would like to go for a retreat, so we have in September, the silent retreat, a 4 days retreat guided by Kainan Tan, so at our beautiful Vijayasala retreat center. So I hope to see some of you there as well. And there again, once again, thank you so much, Jonathan, for your insightful teachings, always very supportive to AB community, very deeply appreciated by all of us. Thank you so much. And good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night. Thank
Sadhu,
you.
sadhu, sadhu.